Alright, so now I'm ready to install the new chain and sprockets. So let me show what I selected here. So that's a Tusk chain from Rocky Mountain ATV. It's actually a pretty decent chain for the cost. Then I got aftermarket front sprocket. I stuck with the original equipment teeth are 14. Now, if you do choose to change the teeth on the front sprocket, that will change the feel of the bike more dramatically than changing the rear. Meaning one tooth difference on the front sprocket makes a much bigger difference than the rear in terms of ratio. Going up on the size of this will increase the potential top speed in each gear, but also decreases the responsiveness or and increases the amount of time it takes to get up to that speed. And in the rear, it's exactly the opposite. So I went with a slightly smaller sprocket, and the reason is I wanted to be able to hold on to second gear just a little bit longer. And I made that choice after spending quite a bit of time on the quad and knowing how it feels. In addition, if you change sizes of your tires, that can actually change the way your bike feels as well in terms of ratio of the engine turns to turns of a wheel. So when you go up on the size of this, it is the opposite of going up on the size of this. So you go up on the size of the rear sprocket, that will decrease the potential top speed in each gear, but make it feel a little more responsive, meaning that the time it takes to get up to that top speed in each gear is a little less. Okay. In this case, I went down, so that'll allow me to hold on to second gear a little longer. The top speed in second gear will be a little higher, but it'll also make it a little bit harder to get up to that top speed because of you're changing the mechanical advantage. All right, so we'll get all this stuff installed. I did clean up the original equipment nut and then this little locking plate, which bends over to hold that in place. Oh, and also, almost forgot to mention, these are pretty awesome little titanium bolts I got from Nice CNC, and they have that nylon locking nut on there too, which is pretty great. I'll still use blue thread sealer on there, but that said, one little extra precaution there is pretty great. So we'll see how the setup works, and better yet, we'll see how it runs. All right, so just a couple pieces as we move through the installation here. So these nuts on the opposite side here torque to 52 foot-pounds. Use, again, blue thread sealer to keep those on. This we're going to tighten to 70 foot-pounds. Now, if you get to 70 foot-pounds and you're not lined up with one of those tabs, tighten it a little bit more. But in order to be able to get that actually tight, because it'll just rotate, we need to have the chain in place and to have these rear bolts tightened up to keep the centerpiece housing from rotating in place. And then you can hold that in place with a rod like that, okay? You could also use the rear brake if that's in place, but this the way I'm going to do it. Now, the other thing too, in terms of tightening that chain, so with these Allen bolts loosened, that center housing will rotate, and you can rotate it basically like this, and you can see that chain will get tighter, and then it'll loosen as I go forward. Now, the other thing you have to be mindful of, depending upon size of sprocket and rear disc brake, is watching for clearance on the skid plate. Because if you don't have enough clearance, you can actually rotate it 180 degrees and get more clearance. So see that we have enough clearance there. So just be mindful of that. Make sure you have enough chain slack, but not too much. So that's just a pinch too much. Not enough, right? So you need usually just about an inch up and down, so something like that. If you want to measure it, you can measure a fixed point with this swing arm. Maybe even go just a tiny bit less there. Something like that is just about right. Now this is an O-ring chain, so it'll still stretch on the first ride, but these things stretch a lot less than some of the non-O-ring chains. And but that said, after the first couple of rides, I'll recheck that, and I'm sure I'll have to tighten it up a little bit. Other little piece I almost forgot to mention is that this clip should always be oriented in this direction, so that way as the sprocket and chain rotate counterclockwise, then if it's this way, it won't tend to come unloosened if it does get snagged on something. If it goes the other way, it could end up loosening up as, again, it rotates this way. So it should be oriented like that, with the round end or the closed end forward in the rotation.